Now, of course, the David Amess story has dwarfed all others. But before David's slaying, his murder most foul, events in Northern Ireland looked like they were going to be the big issue of this week. The Northern Ireland Protocol, signed under duress by the British government in order to get the withdrawal agreement through, signed in defiance of promises made by Boris Johnson to the people of Northern Ireland, and since proving unworkable, at least to an important section of the community there. It was said that it was immutable. It was carved in stone, like the tablets on the mount. Nothing could be changed until they were. The EU, who were never going to compromise on the Northern Ireland Protocol, hey presto, they compromised. Let's hear what happened from Professor Jonathan Tonge, the Professor of Political Science at the University of Liverpool. Professor, welcome back. Always a pleasure to talk with you. Just bring us up to date for those that haven't followed as closely as you will have. Where do we now stand on the Northern Ireland Protocol?
Well, as you said in your introduction, George, the EU has moved on the question of the protocol. The protocol was set up to protect the European Union's single market. It created a border between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, a trading border between GB and NI, with lots of checks at border control posts. Basically, everything that was going from Great Britain to Northern Ireland would be deemed at risk of going into the EU single market, deemed at risk of going south of the border on the island of Ireland, and therefore it was liable to checks. What the EU has offered this week is basically to reduce those checks by around 50%, get rid of some checks up to 80% on such things as livestock checks, but overall a reduction of 50%. And I suppose the question begged now is, will that be sufficient for those unionists who've always been opposed to a sea border between Great Britain and Northern Ireland? Will it be enough for them? And of course, will it be enough for the British government? Because Lord Frost, as Brexit Minister, has made clear that he wants a Protocol Mark II rather than simply reductions in a few checks. Lord Frost, as Brexit Minister, has threatened to trigger Article 16, suspending the protocol, which would put the whole thing into abeyance for up to a year, whilst there would be renegotiations about a second, a son or daughter of protocol. So there's all to play for. I'd expect some pretty tough negotiations now between the UK and the EU until at least Christmas time and possibly beyond.
Well, let's deal with the first barrier first, the first hurdle. Is it enough to pacify those in the unionist community? Is 50% going to satisfy them?
It won't satisfy hardline loyalists, those who've been taken to the street, and of course those who rioted only in April last year. For them, it's not about sausages and diminishing checks on chilled meats going from GB to Northern Ireland. It's not about sausages. It's about sovereignty for them. They're insulted by any sort of border between Great Britain and Northern Ireland because they regard them as two sovereign parts of the United Kingdom, two integral parts of the United Kingdom. It won't be enough for the traditional unionist voice, which has one assembly seat, hardline unionist party. It might be enough for the Ulster Unionist Party, led by Doug Beattie, the second largest unionist party within the Assembly. They don't want to bring down the Northern Ireland institutions in opposition to the protocol. So that then begs the question, what about the DUP, the largest unionist party led by Sir Geoffrey Donaldson? There things become very tricky. Geoffrey Donaldson said that he wanted meaningful reform of the protocol. He said reform. He didn't use the term reductions in the number of checks. So I think it's a question of which way the DUP goes here, because the DUP at the moment are standing by their threat that if there's not really substantial change to the protocol by the end of November, they may walk away from Stormont and in effect collapse the Good Friday Agreement, or at least the political institutions associated with that agreement. And that really begs the question, well, how will we be able to get back those institutions if they do come tumbling down?
Well, of course, they have an incentive to do that because not only is the Sinn Féin vote rising, or the broader nationalist camp rising, but new pretenders to the crown of Northern Ireland unionism are arising. You made the point, the traditional unionist voice only have one member in the Assembly, but if the election was held tomorrow, they very well might take over from the DUP as the biggest party. So the knowledge that one is to be hanged in the morning concentrates the mind wonderfully, as Dr. Johnson said. If I were Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, I really would not want to be facing the electorate in the spring of next year.
Yeah, the DUP are in trouble. If you look at the recent polls, the unionist vote is split three ways. And remember that under the Northern Ireland system, the largest party will take the first ministership of Northern Ireland. So at the moment, Sinn Féin are very much on course to take the first ministership whenever the election is. We assume that the institutions will survive until next May, when there's going to be an election anyway. The DUP need a minor miracle now. They need to hoover up the votes that appear to have gone over to the two other unionist parties. They need a minor miracle if they're going to cling on to their top dog status within Northern Ireland, to keep the first ministership. That would be a grievous blow, the loss of the first ministership to unionists. It would be the first time it had ever happened, and it would be another step, at least symbolically, towards a united Ireland. You can call the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister co-equals, and legally they are, but in symbolic terms, for unionists to lose the first ministership, what does that say about the long-term future of Northern Ireland? It would be a pretty bleak message for the unionists. There are other reasons, I should say, that why the DUP have become less enamoured with Stormont, though. They've not been able to veto other legislation, whether it be on same-sex marriage, whether it be on abortion. And the Westminster has said that it will introduce Irish language legislation this autumn. So the DUP, which was once top dog and which could veto stuff that it didn't like at Stormont, the DUP is no longer in that dominant position. And I think that has led to disenchantment in the ranks, and opposition to the protocol is the catalyst in many ways for that opposition.
Yeah, as I always thought that Brexit would be, although that wasn't widely understood by former friends of mine in the north. Let's go to the other hurdle then, the British government one. What does Lord Frost do? What does Boris Johnson do?
Well, Lord Frost has been talking in very hardline terms. I heard him speak at a conference I was at Oxford last month, and then I was an observer at the Conservative Party conference, a very poorly attended speech, it should be said. The Conservatives didn't bother getting out of bed to hear, one of the most crucial constitutional speeches of our time in some ways, 9:10 in the morning, and there was about 50 people in the whole of the Conservative Party's auditorium. Wow. in Manchester. It was thinly veiled stuff. What they heard got the very small numbers there to their feet, because it was a hardline, belligerent speech from Lord Frost that basically said that the EU needs to budge. We're not going to budge. If the EU won't budge, we'll trigger Article 16 and suspend the protocol. And basically what has emerged since, if you believe Dominic Cummings, is quite how much the British government never really believed in the protocol. It was signed, as you said in your introduction, under duress to some extent. It was about getting Brexit done to win a general election, and we'll try and, unhinge this protocol afterwards. And of course, there was the famous visit of Boris Johnson to the DUP conference, where he told them that he would never sign such a deal, producing a border between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So A, the British government doesn't really believe in the protocol, and B, I think the British government would like to down the protocol. That's obviously, wonderful news for unionists in Northern Ireland, but will enrage nationalists and others within Northern Ireland. It should be said that Lord Frost has said that he does believe there will still be a treaty where Northern Ireland will still be subject to some EU rules, exceptionally, unlike any other part of the UK. So even Lord Frost doesn't believe that the protocol will disappear altogether, but he is looking at the moment for a very, very different version from the one that the EU envisages, the one that Maros Sefcovic, as the European Commission Vice President dealing with this, envisages. And I'm not sure where the big compromise comes here beyond what the EU offered, that is a reduction in checks this week.
Why did the EU make these concessions?
I think partly the EU was spooked by the riots that took place in Northern Ireland in April. There's not much point in keeping the border on the island of Ireland soft, which everyone agrees with, and many people, on the island of Ireland wouldn't like a border full stop on the island of Ireland. But there's no point in keeping that border soft if you create another border which leads to violence within Northern Ireland. So I think that was part of the equation. I think secondly, the EU began to take Lord Frost seriously, that he wasn't for budging and that he would trigger Article 16 to suspend the protocol. And thirdly, I think that the EU began to realise that the UK government, whatever its flaws, isn't that interested in trying to get backdoor access to the EU single market or try to undermine the EU single market by flooding it with goods and breaking trading rules. The UK is much more interested in Brexit than it is about undermining the EU single market. If it was cared that much about the EU single market, it would have tried to stay in it rather than go for the harder Brexit. So I think there's been recognition of that on the EU side, and they don't need the level of checks that they initially thought they would to protect their own single market. You can really do a lot of this stuff fairly light touch. But 50% of a sea border is still a sea border for unionists who don't like the idea in constitutional terms. I don't think you can really ultimately solve that constitutional issue. If Lord Frost is prepared to accept a son or daughter of the current protocol, then you do still have that constitutional issue that annoys unionists, that in effect one part of the UK is on trading on very different economic terms than other parts of the United Kingdom.
Has it all brought a border poll and the potential for reunification closer?
There's some evidence that of a slight shift towards favouring Irish unity. If you look at the poll of polls that I did only this week, I think what will be the substantial shifts towards a border poll will be the next two elections, both north and south of the border. If Sinn Féin takes the first ministership, as I would expect in the north, and if Sinn Féin becomes the largest party in government in the south, which it is certainly on course to do if you look at the opinion polls there, then, if you've got Sinn Féin as the dominant player in government on the island of Ireland and both jurisdictions on the island, then, it becomes more difficult to refuse a border poll. Under the terms of the Good Friday Agreement, it's the call of the Secretary of State in the north who, without any stated formal criteria, has to take account of public opinion and then call a border poll and then can call one subsequently every 7 years. I'm not sure that Brandon Lewis, as the current Secretary of State, is going to be calling a border poll anytime soon, but momentum will certainly gather if Sinn Féin has those election successes, because Sinn Féin is unambiguously committed to a border poll and to exercise that principle of consent that was there at the heart of the Good Friday Agreement, consent for a united Ireland.
Professor, it's been a marvellous tour of the north of Ireland. Thanks very much indeed for helping us with that.